Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're a parent navigating the New Jersey special education system right now, you might be feeling incredibly overwhelmed. Let's be honest, it often looks like a massive bureaucratic maze just filled with an alphabet soup of acronyms, dense legal jargon, and endless meetings. It is completely natural to feel a bit lost or intimidated when you first start this journey for your child, but that is exactly why we're here today. We're going to break down this entire New Jersey special education process into 9 clear, totally manageable steps. By the end of this explainer, you're going to have a map. Many parents feel things are happening around them rather than with them. That comes directly from our source material, and wow, it perfectly captures the anxiety so many parents experience. Hit the nail right on the head. That feeling of helplessness usually comes from simply not knowing what step comes next. Well, we are going to change that today. This guide is your solution, because once you understand the sequence of events, those legal timelines, and exactly what you're entitled to at every single stage, you transform from a passive bystander into a fierce, empowered, and active navigator for your child's education. So, here's our roadmap for today. First up, moving from reactive to prepared. Next, the starting point. Then, evaluations and eligibility. After that, we'll dive into IEP development and placement. And finally, staying the course. All right, let's jump right into section 1, from reactive to prepared. It's all about knowing the process. Which brings us to section 2, the starting point, where you initiate the referral. So this is the very first phase of the journey, step 1, the referral. A referral is simply a formal request to evaluate a child to determine if they actually have a disability and require special education services. Now here's a surprising fact, and a really empowering one. As a parent or guardian, you have the absolute right to initiate this referral yourself. You don't need a teacher's permission, you don't need a doctor's note, and you absolutely do not need to wait around for the school to suggest it. If you have a concern, you can make the referral. Now, you might be wondering, can I just bring this up at parent-teacher conferences? There is a massive legal difference between a verbal request and a written one. You might have a fantastic conversation with a teacher or a principal where you say, hey, I think my child needs to be evaluated. But legally, that verbal request does absolutely nothing. A written request, on the other hand, is basically your first magic item in this process. Sending a letter or an email formally requesting an evaluation is what actually triggers the strict legal timeline that the school must follow. So put it in writing, keep a copy, and definitely note the date you sent it. Moving right along to section 3, evaluations and eligibility. We'll be covering steps 2, 3, and 4 here. So after the referral is sent, the child study team, often called the CST, is notified. Then we hit step 2, consent, step 3, evaluation, and step 4, the eligibility meeting. Before any testing happens, you absolutely must give written consent. But please remember this, because it's super important. Giving consent for an evaluation does not obligate you to agree to special education services later on. You are simply saying, yes, you can test my child. And these evaluations are comprehensive. They might include psychological, educational, speech, or occupational therapy assessments. And your input as a parent, that is a vital part of this evaluation. Nobody knows your child's history and home behavior better than you do. Okay, let's talk about your secret weapons in New Jersey, strict legal deadlines. Day 0 is when you send that written referral. By day 20, the school must respond. They have exactly 20 calendar days to either send you a consent form for evaluation or explain to you in writing why they're refusing. Once you sign that consent form, boom, a new clock starts. The school has exactly 90 calendar days to complete all the evaluations. These deadlines exist to protect your child's time and to enforce accountability. They are firm rules, folks, not mere suggestions. So the crucial point is what happens right before step 4, the eligibility meeting. In New Jersey, you must receive copies of the evaluation reports at least 10 calendar days before that meeting. I highly advise you to strictly enforce this rule. Do not let them hand you a dense 20-page psychological report as you're walking into the conference room. Nobody speed reads that fast. You need those 10 days to read, digest, highlight, and formulate your questions so you never walk into an eligibility meeting blind. At the eligibility meeting itself, the team has to answer 2 big questions. First, does your child have a disability that falls under one of the 14 eligibility categories in New Jersey? The federal IDE law has 13, but Jersey actually adds an extra one for preschoolers, bringing it to 14. But here is the catch. A diagnosis alone just isn't enough. The second question is, does that disability negatively impact their educational performance? A child might have ADHD or dyslexia for sure, but if the team determines it isn't significantly impacting their education, they might not be found eligible. Both of those conditions must be met. All right, Section 4, IEP Development and Placement. We're covering steps 5, 6, and 7 here. If your child is found eligible, huge congratulations. You've crossed a major threshold into the next phases. Step 5 is IEP development, Step 6 is the placement decision, and Step 7 is the start of services. The Individualized Education Program, the IEP, outlines your child's current performance, their annual goals, and the services they're going to receive. Remember those 10 days of reading the reports from Step 4? That preparation pays off right here, because the IEP must be a collaborative effort. It is not a pre-written document that the school just slides across the table for you to sign. You are a full member of this team, and your concerns must be documented. Once the IEP is written, the team decides on placement, which is Step 6. Placement is entirely guided by a fundamental principle called the least restrictive environment, or LRE. Simply put, this means that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities should be educated alongside their non-disabled peers. This breaks a very common misconception out there. A specific placement is never automatic based solely on a diagnosis. Two kids with the exact same classification might have entirely different placements based on their own unique individual needs. To actually achieve this, the law requires a continuum of placements. The team must start by considering the least restrictive option first, which is the general education classroom with supports and accommodations. If and only if the child cannot succeed there, they look at the next step, perhaps a pull-out resource room for part of the day. Then, and only then, it moves to more restrictive options like a self-contained special education class, a separate specialized school, or finally, an out-of-district or residential placement. They literally cannot just jump to a restrictive environment. They have to justify why the less restrictive ones wouldn't work, even with the right support. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, Staying the Course. This covers our last two steps, 8 and 9. Securing the IEP and the right placement is a massive victory, for sure. But your child is going to grow and change, and the plan needs to change right along with them. That brings us to Step 8, the annual review, and Step 9, the triennial reevaluation. At least once a year, the whole IEP team will meet up to evaluate progress and set new goals. And at least every 3 years, the school must reevaluate your child to ensure they're still eligible and that their needs haven't drastically shifted. However, please remember, you do not have to wait for these scheduled check-ins. As a parent, you can request a review meeting earlier if you feel things just aren't working or your child's needs have changed. When you do go into these annual reviews, I want you armed with specific questions to keep the team focused on actual data and real progress. Ask them straight out. Did my child hit last year's goals? And if not, why? Ask, are these services still appropriate based on what we've seen? And importantly, is this placement still the least restrictive environment? As your child makes progress, they should ideally be moving toward less restrictive settings. Keep the team focused on the data. So we've covered the 9 steps, from that very first written referral all the way through annual maintenance. You've seen the timelines, you understand consent, and you know how placement is actually supposed to work. You are no longer just watching this process happen around you. You have the tools to make it happen with you. So I will leave you with this empowering question. Now that you know your rights and the path forward, what will be your next step to advocate for your child? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep advocating, and I will see you next time.